Hey everybody, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name's Ryan Roberts. So, today on the show I'm talking to acoustic and electric bassist Gary Wicks. Gary has performed with a whole host of folks including Quincy Jones, Manhattan Transfer, Jon Hendricks, Monica Mancini, and a lot of other people. We were talking before the recording started, and the conversation here kind of picks up where we were at. I feel like we covered some really cool ground. He talks about some techniques he uses to stay centered before he plays, what it was like getting lessons from Milt Hinton, his time at the New England Conservatory, and some ideals he communicates to his students that all come from a real-world perspective. I had a lot of fun connecting with Gary again, and here's my friend Gary Wicks. Yeah, it's weird in my head, but I'm not gonna.
Lots of things are weird in my head.
This is the least of them. Gary, welcome.
Thanks.
Yeah, man.
How are you?
Right before we turn on the mics, we're talking about teaching styles. Let's pick up that conversation.
Yes.
Where were we at? We were talking about preparing students with real life training, so not just a curriculum.
Yeah, exactly. I always try to find sort of an anecdotal approach when I'm showing a student something where it's not just, here's where you put your finger, here's how you play this line, but I mean, that's part of it, getting them prepared on the music. But then outside of that, if it's for an audition or if it's for a performance, even if it's a school thing or real life thing, like things that they're not experienced with yet, to kind of talk about that, to say, like, for example, if it's an audition, let's say you want to be at, like, to really feel comfortable in the performance, you think you need to be at like 90% solid on the music. You feel like that's good enough.
Right.
But when you step into an audition, if you haven't done it before or very little experience, you're not necessarily prepared for the other elements that affect you. All of a sudden you start to feel nervous and you don't know why. Right. Like, why is there a panel of people sitting there with pencils, all writing something down at the same time? What did I just do wrong? Right. You know, or other life forces affect you, like you get a flat tire on your way and you change the tire, and now instead of being early, you're getting there just in time to walk in and start playing.
You're a little frazzled.
You know, how to center yourself, all these things that can affect your performance that were now, if everything had gone perfectly, you would have been in an okay place for your performance. Yeah. But now you're under the gun. You're not feeling at 90%. You're feeling at like 70%. Sure. And that's not going to cut it, right? There's going to be somebody else who's going to come in who's going to be at 90%, and they're going to get the job.
Right. And maybe with more comfortability.
Exactly.
In addition to the 90%. So how do you go about teaching students about nerves?
So one of the things is I try to impress upon them, and I've found the success I've had with this point is when they've actually been through it and seen what I meant, is to be so far prepared that it feels like you could be chucking tomatoes at them and it's not going to mess them up. Right. Like, just know the music cold and have it so well prepared that you don't need to look at the music. You know, I could be, dancing in front of you, making faces, and it's not going to break your concentration. Right. Whereas if you don't have the music that well learned and you still need to look at it and you're still a little shaky at a couple parts, but you're hoping you can pull it off, then you're going to easily get thrown off if something goes slightly wrong. So the first thing I try to impress upon them is to be as absolutely prepared as possible. Yeah. Like, let's say the piece of music should be at like 120 BPM. I say, okay, make sure you can play it at like 150. Yeah. Make sure you can play it at 100. Right. Be able to play it really flawlessly at different tempos. That way, you're okay if you come in and they say, we'd actually like to hear it a little faster. Or actually, we'd like to hear it a little slower here with that. Feels like, then you're not like, oh my God, I don't know what to do.
It's really internalized.
Yeah, so that you really are just comfortable musically, so that you can be prepared to manage the other things that come at you. Another thing I talk about with students in regards to these high pressure situations isn't necessarily musical ideas, but how to center yourself, how to get yourself.
Yeah, going back to the flat tire. Yeah, analogy you just used, like that can happen in life. Mm-hmm.
And it has. I was on my way to a gig one time. I was coming from a church gig in like the South Bay area, trying to get up to Koreatown for an afternoon jazz hit. Yeah. And I was looking at the clock. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to be early. I'll have time to grab lunch. My tire blows out. Oh. And I'm stuck on the side of the road waiting because I turns out I don't have anything in my car to change the tire. I have the spare, but I don't have a jack or anything. And I realized
You have AAA?
well, I have roadside assistance with my insurance.
Okay.
So I call, but it's a Sunday, and
Burn.
I'm told that I'll get a call from the tow guy when they're on their way.
Yeah.
About 45 minutes in, CHP pulls up behind me and is like, is everything okay? Why are you sitting on the side of the road? I'm like, tire blowout. And their guy comes and fixes it for me.
Okay.
Before I ever even get a call from the insurance roadside assistance.
Yeah.
I make it to the gig about 10 minutes past the downbeat.
Okay.
But now, of course, I've got that frazzled energy of like rushing in, trying to set up quickly, and they're like, "It's okay, man. We understand. Take your time." But I don't feel like I can. Take my time.
You got all the anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it happens. It can happen.
Yeah.
I've also told my students, like, listen, any situation that you think could happen, I've probably been there.
Yeah.
I've broken a low E string on my upright bass when I was on tour with a saxophone quartet. It was 4 saxes, acoustic bass, and drums. So there's no piano, there's no guitar.
Yeah.
No, so I'm the harmonic instrument, if you will, and my low E string breaks. Like, who breaks low E strings on the upright bass?
Right.
Oh, well, the guy who's trying to see how long his strings can last because they're expensive, right? That guy.
How long do they last? I'm notorious for that too.
Man, those strings were old.
I love dead strings, so I kind of push them.
Yeah, I don't remember. This is a long time ago now, but they were very old. And so the band leader says, okay, we're going to take an early break while our bass player changes his string. And then I had to inform him that I don't have any spare strings with me because who has spare upright bass strings? Right. Well, now I do.
Yeah.
I have spare strings
and
with every bass.
Jack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, exactly. It's like you learn from your mistakes.
Sure.
I was on stage with the Blue Note when I was working with Manhattan Transfer, and the singers were headed to the stage when all of a sudden I hear a crackling come out of my amp. And I'm thinking, oh, that's weird. And I jiggle the cable plugged into my pickup, and I hear this kind of crackle get louder, and then almost like a pop and a hiss.
Yeah.
Realize the pickup just died. And so I waved to the MD.
That was on your upright?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then I'm like, wait, did that just happen? So I quickly hit the AB switch to switch to my electric bass to see if it was the amp.
Right.
But that signal's coming through fine. I'm like, okay, back to the upright. Nope, dead. So I wave to the MD like, hey, hang on. And I wave over the sound guy. So they call off the singers. They kind of stop midway to the stage. And the sound guy comes and goes, what happened? The pickup broke. He's like, well, where's your backup? I said, right. I'm going to go buy one tomorrow morning.
Right.
We're in New York City. I'm going to go down to Gage bass shop tomorrow morning. But right now, I kind of got a situation. He's like, okay, here, grabs a microphone and wraps it in a towel, shoves it in the bridge of the bass, kicks a wedge towards me and says, go, I'll dial you in. Yeah. Singers run on stage.
I actually really like that sound.
And
like that sound works great on my bass in the studio.
Yeah. Not great for a live situation on stage with a full band.
No.
But got through it.
Yeah.
But once again, I was like, okay, note to self, always have a backup pickup. Now
so you're just bringing a whole spare bass all the time now?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So now I travel with extra strings, extra pickups, like always. I mean, yeah. And
right,
so I was
just
telling
like
my
a Sunday afternoon brunch gig is like 4 basses, 2 amps.
Yeah.
Roadside assistance.
Exactly.
On standby,
exactly. I'm
full tank of gas.
And I'm carried in on a stretcher just in case I should hurt myself. Yeah, exactly. So I tell my students, like back to the original question, how to prepare for life stuff. I just say, listen, and I give them some of these examples.
Sure.
Anything can go wrong. Things that you don't even think you need to prepare for can happen. So you need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best as often as possible. Not to be sort of a naysayer, but, within reason.
Yeah, don't live in that space, but be aware that might happen.
Exactly. So that when it does happen, you're not like, oh, man, I don't know what to do. Sorry. Instead, you're like, give me 10 minutes. I can fix this. And people are like, man, good on you. You're a pro. You're prepared. Right? A lot of those things I've learned from doing. But so I tell my students, be prepared for something to go terribly wrong. Mm-hmm. And most of the time, everything's going to go really well, and you're going to be in great shape. When something does go wrong, something happens, you didn't leave enough time on the road, LA traffic, you're running behind. When it does go wrong and you're feeling that anxiety, your adrenaline's pumping.
That's the worst.
It's the worst way to play. You need to center yourself. So you need to try to find for you what works as a technique to calm yourself back down. Yeah. One thing that always works for me, and it sounds really silly, is I just kind of slow my breathing down, kind of close my eyes for a minute, just try to find a way to like physically center myself and calm myself down.
Decompress from all that.
Yeah. Because you have to. Yeah. You're going to like pop a blood vessel, right?
Yeah. I try to get to the gig like early, because like just
Right.
set up, get in the space,
Right.
either eat at the restaurant or wherever the gig is, you know.
And I used to be that guy. Now with like 2 kids and running around, often I'm like just getting there in time, and I hate that feeling.
Oh.
But so I try to at the very least be as prepared as I can in those situations. Or if I know that it's a tight connection, I'll tell the band leader like, hey, just a heads up, I might be getting there like
Coming in hot.
really young. I might be coming in hot, but I will be there and I won't miss the downbeat.
Sure.
You know, like I make sure that if I accept a gig, that I'm not going to be like, oh, I can't make the downbeat, but I'll be there, because that's not being there, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so as far as like the teaching thing, I try to like give them examples and say like, hey, learn from my mistakes or my experiences. Plan ahead, be as prepared as you can, and know for yourself anything that you know works for you to kind of center yourself in a stressful situation. Even if nothing's gone wrong at that moment when you're about to perform for people, you'll find all of a sudden your heart's pounding.
Yeah.
And things feel tense. And musically, I always talk to them about whatever the pieces they're going to play. Know what's the hardest part in that piece for you.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a classical piece, if it's a jazz piece, whatever it is, what's the hardest thing? Is it a fast run? Is it, whatever it might be.
Sure.
And before you start to play and you're centering yourself to begin, think about that part and think about the tempo you need to play that part where you can nail it.
Yeah.
And then start.
Gauge it from there.
Yeah. Usually the first few notes you're going to play are going to be pretty easy, and you could start too fast because your adrenaline's pumping. And then you get to that hard part and you're like, oh, yeah.
And if they practice it from beginning to end in that way, instead of like jumping in at the most difficult passage, like if they practice it from beginning to end, they've played the beginning notes more than they've played any of it.
Sure.
So that's obviously they're going to have that together.
Yeah.
It's
exactly.
It's going to be that rough section in the middle that's always giving them a little bit of trouble that they're kind of keeping an eye and an ear on.
Exactly.
Instead of starting there.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the roughest part of it. Start there.
Yeah.
Because spend the most time on that, because that's
exactly.
You don't want to get all the way there and then you just fold.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would suck.
Yeah, the folding doesn't help anybody.
No.
And
in any
like,
scenario.
I've also had bad auditions where I can say like, yeah, I'm not just telling you this because I read it in a book,
right?
Or a teacher told me. Like,
were those school or professional?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when I was in school, my junior year, it was definitely starting to have a little more fun and not spend as much time in the practice room as I had been the first 2 years.
Yeah.
And it was coming up on time for my jury. I sort of knew myself and how much time I needed. Like, my plan was to sort of kind of buckle down a few weeks out and really like put in the hours and be ready, instead of like a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
And then
I still suck at that way of thinking, like the daily investment of like,
it's hard.
instead of just like the cram of like, I'm just going to pull 32-hour days to try to get this all done.
Yeah. And, I had the misfortune of coming down with the flu, probably the worst flu I think I've ever had in my life, where I was like in bed for close to 2 weeks, just sick as a dog.
Oh, man.
Like dropped weight. I was just weak.
Junior in high school?
No, it was college.
Junior college, right.
Yeah. And I should have gone to my teacher and said, I've been really sick. I am in no shape to do my jury. But I guess I felt the responsibility to try and pull it out. Sure. And like, I can do it.
Yeah.
And I was not ready.
Yeah.
And I kind of fumbled my way through the piece. But it wasn't just that. I was weak physically still.
Sure.
And I had this kind of anemic sound. It was a classical thing.
Okay.
And, it just sounded like...
Your mind's not sharp?
Yeah, and but also my sound, my vibrato, everything was just very kind of anemic and tired sounding.
Yeah.
And I was sweating bullets. I was still sick, just trying to get through it. And to the point where they were like, why is he here?
Yeah, right.
And my teacher, went to bat for me. He was like, I know he's been really sick the last couple of weeks. He's not feeling well. He usually plays better than this.
Yeah.
Because they were ready to just fail me.
Oh, wow.
Because I just bombed it.
Okay.
I was just, I was in an embarrassment.
What was the audition for?
It was the jury.
Okay.
It was like the jury. So this was at New England Conservatory. And the way their juries work is it's just one at the end of the school year.
Okay.
And it basically determines, do you get to stay, first of all?
Oh.
And do you get to move on to the next year?
You got to earn your keep.
You got to earn your keep.
Yeah.
And they could say, well, we'll let you stay, but we're not going to promote you to the next year. You're going to have to repeat your junior year.
Okay.
Or in my case, what they did, because my teacher stuck up for me because he knew my playing better than this string faculty that didn't know my name from anyone else's, said, give him the summer. He'll do it again in the fall. And if he doesn't, I vouch for him. I put my name on the line.
Oh, wow.
If he doesn't
Yeah.
If he doesn't impress you, then
Okay.
do what you got to do.
That's really cool. Who was the teacher?
His name is Don Palma.
Okay.
So he's the head of the bass department at New England Conservatory, and he's the bassist with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra. He was in the LA Phil at one point.
Okay.
Just phenomenal player, really
Yeah.
cool guy. And so he came up to me afterwards, and he was like, "So, that happened." I was like, "Yeah, that was not my finest hour." He's like, "No, not even close." He's like, he explained to me what was happening. So of course, I got a formal letter home, which my parents really appreciated. That I was on, how do they word it? I think I was on probation or something.
Okay.
So I busted my hump that summer.
Yeah.
I practiced like every day, hours
great.
every day. Came back in the fall, and now I'm going into my senior year, so I'm also preparing recital material.
Right.
But I have to redo my jury, so I'm trying to stay sharp on that and prepare other music.
Okay.
So when I finally redid the jury, the head of the string department was there, and he was like, "Oh, he sounds wonderful. Why are we listening to him again? I don't remember. What was this about?"
Oh, they had spaced.
Yeah, well, I mean, they knew there was a problem, but he was like listening to my playing. Then he was like, "Oh, he sounds fantastic. I don't recall. What was the problem?" And that affected classical pseudo European accent, but he's probably from like the Bronx. I don't know. But my teacher was like, "Yeah, well, there you go," and everything was fine. But it was one of those times when I didn't prepare as well as I should have ahead of time. But even still, life happened, and I should have been smart enough to say like, "Yeah, I'm in no shape for this. Can we work something out?"
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a tricky circumstance specifically because, like, would you have known to ask? Like,
no.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't know how much they can nudge things.
Yeah, and like,
I think in
like
that scenario, it's best that you did it.
Yeah, as like a 20-year-old kid who doesn't know anything, you're just like, "Well, I was told I have to be here to take the test,
so I'm here, or I'm not there and I get failed."
Exactly. Yeah. It never dawned on me that maybe I could have asked for like a stay of execution.
Right.
And I don't know. Actually, I don't know if they would have even granted that.
Because it wasn't your teacher. Your teacher was the one that.
Exactly. He's the one that said.
In.
Yeah.
Right.
If I had come to them and said, "I'm really sick, I can't play today," I don't know what they would have said.
Sure.
I've never been in that situation, and I don't know of anyone else that has. So yeah, those things happen.
Now you have 2 children, and the correlation I'm curious about is teaching these young students how to prepare for things that you had to learn the hard way.
Mm.
That seems like something my dad would have told me growing up.
Sure.
And I would have just been like, eh. And like in life, still learned it the hard way.
Right.
Do you think you would have learned it the same as a bass player if they would have told you that?
Mm.
Like, because I think...
I think some things, yes. I think some things I would have been like, really, I'm going to break the E string on an upright bass. Those things are like cable. That's not going to happen, exactly. Right? I think certain things would have just happened. But my dad was a bass player, and he was really good at
upright or electric?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
He was really good at he was a good teacher, and he was really good at that sort of preparedness way of like. So a lot of things I feel like I do know or have been prepared for because he would say, "Well, you got to be ready for anything."
Right.
He always called himself a jack of all trades bassist. He'd be playing in the symphony on a Friday night and a wedding band Saturday afternoon.
Yeah,
just a jazz gig Saturday night.
In the trenches.
Doing it all. And that mindset of like, you just got to be prepared for whatever.
Yeah.
And just manage it. And so often there was that mentality behind things he would teach me or talk to me about.
Was that here in L.A.?
No, I grew up in Albany, New York.
Okay.
And so... Yeah, so like what you're saying, like, would I have been as well prepared with some of these situations if somebody had said, this could happen?
Right.
I think some things, yes, and some things you're just, no matter what somebody tells you, you have to kind of...
You have to go through it.
You have to go through it. And that's sort of the approach I've taken with some students is I've said, like, listen, I'm going to tell you this thing that happened to me and let it benefit you. But there's a chance that you probably will only really understand this when it happens to you. Right.
That's actually my dad's line. Is like the older you get, the smarter I'll become. And apparently his dad told him that, and that's just like the Roberts tradition now.
There you go.
But it'll make sense when you're older.
Exactly. And And that's the thing too. Like when you're younger, you don't worry about stuff like that. No. You're like I just want to play.
Right. You're all you want to do is be your hero.
Yeah.
That's
exactly. Yeah. And so some things yes, some things no. I just had to learn the hard way.
Sure.
Yeah.
So undergrad was in classical, grad in jazz.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. I went to New England Conservatory in Boston. It was kind of funny. I auditioned as a classical performance major. I had it in my head I wanted to be a symphony guy.
Okay.
The summer before my senior year in high school, I went out to Tanglewood and was part of the high school Tanglewood Music Festival program, where you get lessons and master classes with members of the Boston Symphony because that's their summer home.
Okay.
And the Boston Symphony has one of the best bass sections in the world. Like that's a monster bass section.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I want to study with these guys.
Yeah.
And like, where do they teach? Boston. I want to go to school in Boston. What schools are there?
Sure.
And I started looking at schools that offered both jazz and classical. And New England Conservatory was...
Just to diversify your...
Yeah, because I was already playing a lot of styles. I played electric bass, I played upright bass. And I actually turned down an offer from Cleveland Institute because it was strictly classical, and I didn't want to be somewhere where it was only one thing. I often think back about that. Like, I wonder what trajectory I would have gone onto with my music, my life, had I done that.
Sure.
Because I don't think I would have shut out these other interests, but I would have been much more focused only on classical for a few years.
Yeah.
Whereas at NEC, I was focused on the classical. That was my major. But at the same time, I started a band with friends I met at school, and we had an R&B funk band that was gigging around town.
Sweet.
I was playing in jazz combos.
Original?
It was eventually we started to work some originals in, but it started out being like playing James Brown grooves and Stevie Wonder tunes, Aretha, Marvin Gaye, all that stuff. But so I was doing a lot of different things. But so I came in, I got accepted, and I came in as a classical major, and then I had this moment of doubt where I was like, but it's going to be really hard to survive in this world as a musician. Maybe I should get a teaching degree.
Yeah.
And they have an ed department. So went back out to the school and met with the head of the music ed program and said, I think I want to switch into the music ed program. And they're like, well, you've been accepted as a performance major, so you definitely qualify. If you want to make that change, that's fine. We'll do it. So I make the change. So I get there in the fall. Now that I'm a music ed major, they're not as concerned about what I do with my private lessons and some of my electives with my classes, because if I was like strictly classical performance as I auditioned, they would be going to be very, very strict as far as what they'll let you do. Sure. Because they want to make sure you're on the right track. Yeah. Right. So because of that, I was able to split my private lessons, half with a classical teacher from the Boston Symphony and half with a jazz teacher.
Oh, dope.
And then I was taking some jazz classes. I was in a jazz combo as well as being in the symphony. So I was getting the best of both worlds now. Right. But the music ed program, turns out, was being phased out. And it was they were phasing out that side of the school, and it was going to be really a performance only school.
So did you not have to do a lot of those methods class for all the instruments and stuff that just seems like a total time suck?
Well, I was supposed to, but within a week of I was like, no, this is not right. I don't want to do this. So I went back to the registrar, and I was like,
want to learn,
I was like, I just want to play bass. Right. I was like, can we switch my major back to classical performance? And they're like, well, since you were accepted as that, we can do that. So they switched it back. But I'd already gotten all my classes signed off on and everything, so I had my studio lesson time split, jazz and classical. Okay. So that first semester went on like that. Yeah. So in the start of the second semester, when I was signing up for classes, the registrar saying, but well, now you're a classical major, but you got jazz lessons. I said, oh yeah, well the student advisor said I could do that, which they did when I was a music ed major. Right. And like, oh, okay, then they approve it. Okay. And I was getting away with it. So this is the other part about the jury that I bombed my junior year. Okay. For my freshman, sophomore, and junior year, I was able to pull this off because I kept saying, oh, I was approved by the advisor. Oh, okay, we'll let you do it. And finally, when I had that terrible jury, I had a good jury my freshman year, a good jury my sophomore year, nobody batted an eye. They're like, okay, pass, move on, just keep doing your thing. Everybody's happy. Third year, I bombed my jury, and they're like, yeah, what's going on with him? Look at his credits. His credits are all over the place. How is he going to graduate on time with a classical degree when he's got, a jazz arranging class, he's got big band, he's got combo, he's got, like, what is this? He's got jazz rhythmic skills class. What is this? And they're like, and that's when my teacher was like, okay. So the other part of what my private teacher did for me, he said, listen, I've worked this out for you, but here's the other thing. Next year, your senior year, you've got to go full classical. You've got to do your studio lesson times 100% with me. No jazz lessons. You've got to fill all your electives with some of the classical harmony and theory classes that you've dodged. You've got to knock it out, or else you won't graduate on time.
Right.
And I was like, okay. Yeah. Point taken. So I came in as a classical major. I had this moment of doubt. I wanted to be a music ed major to have the teaching degree so I could get a teaching job. Sure. And then I was like, for the cost of this school, this private conservatory, like, no. I should be getting the performance degree. This is a elite performance school. I should focus on that. Yeah. And when I'm done, if I really feel like I need the teaching degree, I could go back home to Albany, go to the state school for like a fraction of the price and get a teaching degree. That will be just as valid as a teaching certificate, right? And that became my new plan. Okay. And so I got away with being like kind of doing a double major essentially, almost, until they caught me. Yeah. And they were like, "What have you been doing?"
Did your dad have a degree?
Yeah. He went to a state New York State school in Potsdam, New York, where they have a good music school called the Crane School of Music.
Okay. So that was already on your radar to go to school for music and like go through and get a degree, and that's part of it all.
Yeah. It was like, luckily, because I had a musician father who was a professional musician, he was like, sure, go to music school. Right. He wasn't like, you're going to waste your life. Go get a real...
Go to school for something else and then do that on the side.
Yeah, he was like, yeah, if you're going to do it right.
Sure.
You know? So that was cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Who were you being exposed to jazz-wise? Like, who was your teacher? You had already had some foundation laid in your playing and understanding the jazz guys.
Growing up, yeah. I mean, partly because of my dad, because my dad was a great jazz player, and he was playing with all the greats on the scene. So there'd be times there'd be jam sessions in our basement, and I would just be hanging out with like these great players. Just I didn't know what they were playing, but it sounded cool.
Sure.
And you know, listening to music in the car, you know, I learned early on that Ray Brown is awesome. Yeah. Right. And players like that we'd listen to together all the time. So my dad would expose me to a lot of great music like that.
When you get to college and you already have your feet underneath you, I guess is where I was going. And so how did your jazz teacher navigate that? Where you already had some knowledge, you had maybe an opinion, an approach, something you already gravitated to.
Yeah. Well, I think part of what happened then was it was a combination of the faculty and then the new peers, the new friends I was making, who were all bringing their own interests.
Sure.
And I was telling some students this recently, like now we're in the age of the internet and YouTube, where you can find anything at your beck and call. It's almost too much, but there's so much.
I agree. I've talked about that on here before, about finding new music because it's so...
Exactly.
It's so saturated.
Yeah, so
like
much.
I get lost in it, and it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, it's like you go to click on something, and it's like 5 hours later you come up for air. You're like, what just happened?
Yeah, right.
You know. Yeah. But when I was at NEC, they had a really great listening library, music library, where they had all these private listening stations with these high-end stereo systems, like component stereos, like Yamaha, Onkyo, whatever, Kenwood, all the big brand names. High-end like Sony over-the-ear headphones. Yeah. You could go up to the counter and check out like a dozen CDs and sit down and listen to all this music. And they had every concert that had ever been recorded at the school. Oh, so you could go through the database and be like, wait a second, there's a faculty concert that has Dave Holland and so on and so forth. Let me check that out. Here you go.
Sure.
And you could you could spend hours listening to so much great music. And they had these listening rooms, audiovisual rooms with TVs and VHS players and where we would check out videos. So a group of us would get together after lunch and be like, hey, let's go check out some videos in the library. Yeah. And the group of us, like music geeks, would like sit on the beanbag chairs in the room. And I remember that was my first exposure to Keith Jarrett, a guitar player that's actually from out here, from LA. He's like, oh man, you got to check this out. And he puts on one of this, I think it's a Standards Live or one of the trio things that's a video recording. Gary Peacock, DeJeanette, and
I think I've seen.
Yeah, and so now I've never heard of Keith Jarrett. This is new to me. Okay. Somehow I hadn't, or maybe I've heard him, but I didn't really know. Right. But this was like, I remember this moment like affected me because here's this guy who sounds like he's like whining and moaning while he's playing the most killing stuff, right? And
even his playing is a lot to digest, let alone just like. The nature of that trio.
Each player is like amazing, right? Geez. And we're sitting here,
and the synergy is unreal.
Yeah, and then what was happening was like there'd be a moment where like we would all freak out about something and then start to talk about it and realize we're all freaking out about something different that happened at the same time.
Yeah.
Be like, wait, pause that. Wait, what did you hear?
Yeah.
And we'd rewind it and I'd listen to what this guy heard. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even catch that because I was listening to this.
Yeah.
We'd rewind it and play that. And it would be like this group listening session.
Oh, man, that's great.
We used to do that all the time. And so I was talking to students about that, like, you should not just be isolated with your earbuds and your YouTube and whatnot, and like get together, do some listening with some of your friends. Like if you're trying to get to another plane of level of playing with the, to my bass students, with like the drummer in your combo in school, like go do some listening together.
Right.
And then try to play like the guys you listen to. One of my best friends to this day is a drummer that I went to school with at NEC, and we used to do that. We used to do like bass drum practice sessions. We'd go and listen to something, and then be like, okay, let's try to play like that.
Right.
Like, let's try to play like Gary Peacock and Dejanette. Not going to happen, but we're going to try.
Yeah.
But that effort of like helping each other too,
right.
Not feeling like you're in it alone and pointing things out to each other. Where I'd say, hey man, I noticed, I feel like I hear he does this thing. Can you try? I was like, oh yeah, let me try that, and so on and so forth, and that kind of stuff back and forth. And so that was a big influence in how my jazz understanding would grow from like the peer perspective.
Sure.
But then, so the jazz bass teacher at NEC, I'm not even sure if he's still there. When I was there was Cecil McBee. Okay. And he was a really interesting teacher. Yeah. Sometimes he wanted to talk about technique stuff, and I'd say to him, well, that's great. I was like, just so you know, I'm doing half my lessons with some classical guys that are really harping on technique with me. I was kind of hoping to get more musical perspective, less bass specific and more like genre and experience specific from you.
You just want to learn the language.
Yeah. And so we would do that, and I felt he would always excel in our lessons if I had a really pointed question to ask him. I remember one time, and sometimes also what we would do, and this was really cool, these same friends that we'd do these listening sessions, we would every few weeks come into each other's lesson. So I'd say to Cecil, like, hey,
was this just under your own, like, let's do this? There was, oh man, that's amazing.
And so I'd say to Cecil, like, hey, and because we would do every other week because I was splitting my lessons, jazz and classical. I say, hey, in 2 weeks when I come back, I'd love to bring in a pianist and a drummer and maybe a sax player to play for the lesson, so you can hear me in a playing situation and give me some feedback there. And he's like, I think that's a great idea.
No, it is. Yeah.
And so I would do that. And I remember one time he counted a tune off. It looked like it was I'm looking at a real book page. He's like, let's take a look at this tune. I'm like, okay. And I think at the top it said ballad. And he starts counting off like, and I'm thinking, okay, it seems a little bright. And he's like, that's your whole note. I was like, wait, what? I'm sorry. Come again? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Ding, 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 ding. I'm like,
So he was specifically just throwing you something to see how you were going to deal with it. Okay.
And which was great. And I remember that particular situation, it was just like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. That's how well my timekeeping went. Sure. And because no one had pushed me to play a really fast tempo. Everything we did was like ding, ding, ding. Everything was nice and medium and greasy. Yeah. So the second I had to play outside of my comfort zone, I crashed and burned. Mm-hmm. He was like, this is very interesting, as he's stroking his chin and like thinking about something very sage to say to me. He's like, your time is not very good. Like, okay,
man, that's definitely one of those things that, that doesn't happen regularly on the gig.
No.
You calling tunes that are super up, and like I have to remind myself to practice that and keep that up.
Well, but to that end, what was really cool is that in that moment, of course he took me down a few notches. Like, it's like, I thought your playing was better than this. I'm like, thanks. Appreciate it. I'll work on that. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know what to do other than I got to practice at a faster tempo, but how to manage it physically. I just feel like I physically don't know how to do that. And so we talked about that. Like, well, you dig in really hard when it's a medium tempo, but you can't do that when it's fast. You got to lighten up. I'm like, that's kind of obvious now that you say it. Yeah. Why didn't I realize that? Little things. And he would say, I remember he talked to me about this breathing exercise that I still use to this day when tempos are bright and I'm feeling like I'm on the edge of starting to slow down. He would say, because, when something gets tense, you tend to like kind of tighten up and maybe even hold your breath for a moment. Sure. He's like, you've got to do the opposite. He's like, you've got to intentionally
stay relaxed.
He's like, don't think about the music. When it gets really fast, I want you to think about your breathing. don't even think about what notes you're playing. I don't care if you play the wrong notes. I want to hear your time get better. So breathe really deep, long breaths, and think about breathing into your muscles, and think about keeping your arms very relaxed.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, whatever. He's like, let's try it again. Here's your whole note.
Yeah.
Right. So we do it again, but this time I'm thinking about this stuff, and I kid you not, it was like night and day. I still was struggling, but it was like, okay, now I'm
right.
Now I'm in the ballpark. Now I'm hanging on. And he's like, okay, you still have some work to do, but now you're getting the hang of it. I was like, okay. To this day, that mental and physical exercise has saved me a few times.
I mean, that one's huge because it's very relax based, you're just breathing out all the tension in your body, but also the element of just like kind of averting focus.
Sure.
Like I had a lesson one time, and I remember looking at the fingerboard on the upright, and he's like, why are you looking at it? Like, what are you hoping to see? I'm like, I don't know. It's
just
like,
I'm hoping there's the answers. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And he held his finger on the wall. He's like, just stare right here.
Yeah.
And then like, try it again. And, out of like the 5 or 6 passes I did, 3 or 4 of them, it was there.
Yeah.
Just by kind of letting go and trusting your ears and your hands to do the job without the mental force.
Yeah. Like we can tend to overthink, and then you start to, that snowball effect, like, oh, I did that wrong, and now I'm doing this wrong, and oh my God, you're right. Yeah. So that was one part of, for me, the whole education thing about expanding my jazz knowledge, that there was a lot that I didn't know yet. And through experiences like that would help me to like, I was eager to like expose my weaknesses,
sure.
Which helped to some extent. But I think I was also really lucky that I got to have some lessons with some really masterful bassists that would impress upon me some musical things that I was too immature to know about. Mm-hmm. Because I was studying classical and I've been playing, since I was young, I had a lot of technique sooner than I had experience and maturity.
Sure.
So I could play notes faster than I knew what to do with them. Yeah. And so sometimes I would just sound like really immature, and I needed somebody to tell me like, that's not actually really good what you're doing. Yeah. And there was one experience I had. There was right before I went off to NEC, there was a 2-week jazz workshop in Saratoga, New York, at a school called Skidmore. Okay. And they still do it every summer. And when I did it, the bass teacher one week was the bassist named Todd Kuhlman, who I think was James Moody's bassist for a long time. Yeah. And the other bassist was Milt Hinton, the judge, the legend. And he was really cool. He had this like raspy voice like Miles Davis, but it was really high pitched. Yeah. But I'll never forget my first lesson with him. Was just, man, to this day it schooled me. He was like, okay, let's hear you play some time, and I didn't know what he meant by that. Yeah. I was like, okay, you mean like a walking bass line? He's like, yeah, that'll do. I want to hear some time. Yeah, right. And I'm like, and he's kind of eyeing me like, what's wrong with this kid? And I'm like, oh, okay. I said, like what? Like a blues? He's like, okay, that'd be fine. Let's hear an F blues. I'm like, okay. Gives me a tempo. And at this point in my bass immaturity, I had it somehow ingrained in my mind that the more rhythmic skips and triplets and cool fills you can do within your walking bass line, the cooler and the hipper you sounded. Right. So I start off like boom 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 goon, all these syncopations and stuff, and I'm playing all this stuff. He starts shaking his head back and forth, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, he thinks I'm bad. Yeah. No, he thought I was bad. Right. Right. And after a moment, he's like, no. I said, I want you to play me some time. And now I'm like, I thought I was. Right? I'm like,
I'm grooving. I got all these syncopations.
I got all this stuff worked out.
Don't you know how hip I am, Milt?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm going off to NEC in a couple weeks. I got it together. Yeah. Don't you know how awesome I think I am?
Get it together, old man. Like, check this out.
Yeah, exactly. So, I try again. I do the same kind of stuff. And he's like, no. I said, can you play me some time? Now, can you play me some time or not? And now I feel like 2 inches tall, and I'm thinking apparently not. Yeah. I'm like, okay, let me try again. Do you just want like plain quarter notes? Plain quarter notes. Yeah. Like that's so vanilla. Yeah. You just want quarter notes? And he says, I want time. And I'm like, oh, jeez, all right. So now this is like the 3rd or 4th time I try. So this time I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna play the most solid quarter note I can manage, and I just boom, 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 just start playing quarter notes. And as I'm nearing the end of the 12 bars, he starts to smile and bob his head up and down, and he says, all right, there it is. That's why I said time. Why'd you take so long to play me some time? You know, like, why'd you make me wait for it?
Right.
And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the lesson was like story time with the judge. He says, that reminds me of this time with Dizzy when we were on the road. And I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. You know, it was amazing. But then every day I'd have a lesson with him. And every day he's like, okay, let's see how your time's doing today. And we'd play a different tune and just play through it. We'd play through the tune together, and he'd be like, all right, it's getting better. Keep it up. That reminds me of this other time, you know, another half hour of stories, which were priceless. It was amazing. Of
course.
But that stuck with me. It was like, oh my God. Yeah. All right. And that completely changed my whole way of understanding. And then I started transcribing walking bass lines and all these great recordings and realizing, you know, there's maybe like 2 or 3 times the bass player does a triplet in like an 8-minute track. Yeah. The rest of the time it's all quarter. And I was like, where did I get that idea from, that you have to do all this cool stuff? Right. That wasn't really cool.
Yeah. Some of that's depending on the bass player. Sure. There's guys that are more active than others.
Sure. Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean,
but you know,
and their skips are purposeful to like create a phrase, a 2-bar phrase, or.
But what I also learned from that was that at the time, my time wasn't good enough to do all that stuff and have it work. Right. Like if my time was killing and I did all that stuff, Milt probably would have been like, all right, can you simplify it? Sure. But what he was trying to tell me was like, you're not playing time. You're not playing good time. Right. All that stuff doesn't work. Right. And I realized that afterwards. And to this day, with students that are learning when I'm working with them about how to create walking bass lines, I hear me in them. Yeah. Every time they try to do a syncopation or a triplet, and their time goes out the window right away. They rush. They kind of anticipate the beat and shift the beat. And I'm like, okay. Let's do it one more time, and I put on a metronome, and now they're having a hard time staying steady, and I said, now do it again and don't do anything but quarter notes. Right. And then it starts to happen, and I say, okay.
Yeah, because I mean, you have just the quarter note, like just the time, then you have your note choice within that. If both of those are really, really happening, there's no need for the other stuff.
Exactly.
The other stuff is specifically for whatever is happening in the moment. Yeah. You know, that you're reacting to something that just happened, but you don't have to instigate with these things.
And that stuff,
I mean, you can too.
Yeah,
it's all
but that stuff
whatever.
can come later. You need to get your foundation solid. Yeah. Or else all you're doing is shaking that house like an earthquake, right? Right. And everybody else playing with you will hear that, and they won't want to play with you. Yeah. They'll be like, oh yeah, that cat, don't call him.
Right. It's all that.
Yeah. And so, you know, I feel like I was really fortunate in sort of my, you know, extent of my jazz education was getting to have some time spent with some of these old masters that they weren't concerned with any of the flashy stuff. They were concerned with imparting the knowledge of like what your job really is as a bass player, the fundamentals, and like get that. Don't worry about that other stuff. Right. Get this, and if you can't get this, go do something else with your life. Yeah. You know, right. And I remember also with a lesson one time with Cecil where he commented about how, and I had never thought of this before. He was like, when you guys are out there playing, you're representing me. You're going out there saying, Cecil McBee teaches me to do this. Yeah. And you do stuff that I wouldn't teach you to do, that I don't approve of you doing, that I tell you not to do. You're dragging my name through the mud. Wow. I got a reputation. Don't ruin my reputation. Okay. And I was like, oh, geez. Okay. Yeah. I never really thought about that. I mean, I'm not trying to play badly. Right. But I see your point. Like, if you're telling me, don't do this, this doesn't work, or fix this, or work on this, and I don't, and I go out there and then people say, oh, who do you study with? And I say, Cecil McBee. They say, Cecil taught you to play like that? And you know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, okay. Sorry, Cecil.
Yeah, my bad.
I'll work on that.
Yeah. So what recordings do you send students to transcribe or like, you know, without going all the way back to necessarily Milt Hinton?
Sure. Well, yeah, I guess
are there some, you know, like I know John Clayton, We Get Requests is like a big record for him. Yeah. Do you have some record? Yeah, it's a fantastic record.
Not necessarily records per se, but it kind of also depends on what the particular thing is that we're working on. Like for me, when it's a student first diving into walking bass lines, one of my favorite recordings to set them on because I think it's a very accessible song harmonically. Because some songs in the jazz repertoire can be very confusing harmonically if you're new to it. A lot of transitory modulations and whatnot.
Sure.
But Autumn Leaves is a pretty diatonic tune. Right. And the Cannibal Adderley recording off of something else, Sam Jones. That bass line is like a perfect textbook. How do you create a walking bass line?
Yeah.
Do this.
Right. And Miles' solos, how do you create a solo? Like that tune is just so killing on so many levels.
Exactly. And excuse me. So I've used that and I've transcribed it. Yeah. So I have it as like almost like an answer key, like a point of reference. So when I have the students do it, I can quickly look it over and just compare to what I've done. Just be okay, yeah, you're right, or you're off, or just to kind of guide them in their process of what it's like to kind of take things down by ear and to expand their understanding of notation and whatnot. Sure. But most importantly, for the concept of like, how do I create a walking bass line? Like I'll talk about the fundamentals of that, but you can do that, but I feel like you need an example.
Oh yeah.
So I'm not going to be in the practice room playing for you every day. Right. So here's the recording you can listen to every day. And if you transcribe this, but you have to also analyze. You have to look at it and say, okay, over a G minor chord, he's playing G, B flat, D. Why is that? Right. Because those are the notes of the G minor chord. Hey, there we go. Things like that. And so I think that's a great, and also besides harmonic sense, but like what we were talking about before with timekeeping and rhythm and feel, like that's a great example of just a great walking bass line. And so I've used that a lot in that context. Of course, some Ray Brown stuff, like We Get Requests is great. Yeah.
Relaxing with the Miles Davis Quintet PC. That's one of my records.
Yeah.
Love that record.
A lot of times I've had students come to me and be like, yeah, I want to transcribe this thing. And sometimes I'm like, okay, yeah, that's in your wheelhouse. Let's do that. I had a student come to me one time with Softly in the Morning Sunrise, Paul Chambers, where PC's playing the melody. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, this is a good one. There's a couple cool things about this for us to work on. So yeah, and I think you're at a point where you can manage this. Let's do that. And I've had where they come to me. I had a student one time come to me like early on in his progress, being like, yeah, I'm trying to transcribe this Christian McBride solo, and I'm like, Christian McBride bass transcription is not for the faint of heart. Like you gotta be ready. Like I've done a few of them.
A lot of time with transcribing, that's gonna take you 4 years.
And exactly. And I've done a few where I'm like, okay, this is all right. This is hard. And I feel like I know what I'm doing with that. Right. Where I had to kind of gently kind of steer this guy, like, okay, I see what this tune is. Listen to it. I'm like, okay, I see what you're looking for. Let me take you to something else first. Yeah. That's gonna kind of be a stepping stone to get you there. Sure. Because I feel, and I try to be careful not to discourage. I try to teach with encouragement, not discouragement. So I try to say, listen, this is really challenging. I find this challenging. And I'm concerned that you're going to kind of get caught in a black hole where you're going to spend a lot of time on this and feel frustrated. By all means,
just not.
Yeah. I don't want to say you're not ready for this, but here's something else that's similar who came before. Like here's a Ray Brown thing, or here's a Paul Chambers thing or an Oscar Pettiford thing. Here's something else that's this falls in the lineage of that. Sure. This is going to be a little more accessible. Yeah. More manageable and a lot more, a faster, more attainable goal for you. Yeah. So let's set smaller, more achievable goals so you can do that, and that'll get you. And by the time you get through a bunch of this thing that you're struggling to do now is going to seem much more manageable. Let's get you there.
Right. Because I mean, do you know Christian? I don't know Christian.
I've met him a couple times. I don't know him.
Right.
But
my only point is like Christian didn't start right at Christian.
No.
Christian went through Ray. So if you want to get to where Christian is, like pick up go on the path that Christian was on. Yeah. If you want that thing, get it where he got it.
Oh, exactly.
So does go to Ray, go to PC, go to Sam Jones, go.
Sure. And I'm sure he would say the same thing. I will say though that Christian is such a phenomenal bass player that he was Christian before most people could get to being like Christian. You know what I mean? Like he was amazing when he was in high school. Yeah. So it's like, okay. I mean, to try and be like him is a very lofty goal. Sure. Doesn't mean you shouldn't strive towards that. But But my point being that as far as like recordings that I go to, that's for a more advanced player to start digging into some of his stuff. Although there are some of his things that are not quite as advanced, that are more attainable. There was one I worked with a student where it was a blues, and it was actually a really great bass solo that was very thematic, and for the most part, not super chopsy, because he has tremendous technique. That some of his solos can be such a flurry of notes that it's like, even if I get them all down, I don't know if I can even play them.
Right.
I forget what tune it was. It was a blues, but it was a particular tune where the majority of his solo was very bluesy, very thematic. Just laying into it, where I was like, okay, this is actually a good one. It's a great lesson in how to develop motifs in your solo.
Yeah.
And a lot of it was actually down in the bass range.
Oh, cool.
So it was like for a student who's just kind of starting to get his feet under him, this is actually tough for him, but a good achievable goal. It's gonna work for it, but I think he can do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's what I try to do with him as far as that stuff. And you know, I do have some recordings I turn to. There's a great Red Mitchell bass solo on Ornithology where it's just one chorus. So it's just one chorus down, and it's also very thematic. It's a lot of great bebop vocabulary in his solo.
Yeah.
So that covers a lot of ground in a short one pass through the tune. So it doesn't necessarily take you a long time to get it. And I've had success with students on that transcription where when they're able to play along with the recording, they feel like they're playing bebop. I mean, because they are. Sure. Where like before they started that, they didn't know how to play exactly how to do that, and then they start hearing like, okay, and I also with certain
getting it through how a bass player has digested it, and not like trying to cop the Omni book,
right?
Is like
exactly.
You don't need to go to the Omni book,
and that's
go through how it was adapted to the bass and how it's going to lay a lot easier.
And that was the next thing I was going to say about it is not only just what are the notes, but how to phrase like that bass player, because. I remember I did an Oscar Pettiford transcription when I was at USC, and I had a really cool response from Peter Erskine. He said all he wrote was good Pettiford eighth notes, and what he meant was like you did a good job of matching the way he's feeling in phrasing the eighth notes. It's not outdated, but it's dated. Like that's not necessarily how you would swing eighth notes today,
right?
And that's probably not how you swing eighth notes when you're playing on your own. But you understood. To do this transcription properly, that was part of it. Not just get the notes, but how to play like he played.
Feel what they feel.
Feel what they feel. Because you're not necessarily going to play like that, but that's going to be a component that adds to
It's in there, and you have it to pull from.
Exactly.
And it'll help you shape your phrase, so you can couple that with the Dave Holland thing or whatever else is going on. I think that's so huge to keep your bandwidth really, really wide, so you have all these things.
Yeah.
And, hopefully you can... I mean, the next step is getting in touch with yourself and really being able to imagine and pull that and hear it in your inner ear and feel it and all the honesty of presence and all that. But it's in there, so you're not just this one thing that comes out and it's just that every time. Yeah,
exactly. To get from that academic experience of taking this down, practicing it, learning to play like them, and then how does that organic transformation take place so that this can become part of how you play, because it won't necessarily happen immediately.
No.
I remember also when I was in Boston, there's a great bass player in Boston named John Lockwood, and I did 1 year, I think it was my junior year, I did my jazz lessons with him. So I did 2 years with Cecil. My third year I did my jazz lessons with John Lockwood, and I wasn't ready for John Lockwood.
Okay.
Because he's a really organic player.
Conceptual
guy. I mean, he can do all the fundamentals. He knows all that. He doesn't want to talk about that. Not that he doesn't want to, but I would say to him, like, so how do I play a bebop line? How do I solo?
Music comes from this other place.
Well, his answer to that was go transcribe. I'm like, yeah, but I'm paying for these lessons with you. Can you just tell me how to do it? And he's like, this is how you do it. Go transcribe some Charlie Parker solos. And I'm like, but can you tell me? And so I wasn't ready for his level of teaching because I still was pretty immature musically. Sure. I didn't understand a lot of that because I also was doing a lot of classical studying, where a lot of my classical studying was a teacher saying, here's how you do this bow technique.
Right.
Here's how you play this thing. Let me show you. Now you practice it. So I would go to the jazz lesson and be like, show me how to do that. And be like, well, go listen to the recording.
How did those jazz approaches affect your classical playing? Like this
it opened my ears.
Open mind.
It opened my ears a lot, yeah. Where it affected my classical playing the most was in the orchestra.
Okay.
When I would notice that, you got like 8 bass players in a line that need to sound like one bass player.
Yeah.
And what I found was this, there is a certain level of humility you need to embody in order to blend. So sometimes you might be right with what you're about to do, but because the majority rule is going to do this thing, if you want to sound like a good bass section, you got to join in.
Right.
And maybe we have to play this note a little early, even though it feels wrong to me from my jazz knowledge of playing good time,
Sure.
of Milt hitting in my head being like, play me
Right.
time.
Right.
In the classical setting, the time is a little different. Sometimes it has a lot more elasticity. And so sometimes the bass section has to sound a little early or play a little early to sound on time, which was a lesson I learned also one time when I was principal of a bass section at Tanglewood, that summer program where the basses kept sounding late in this one entrance, and the conductor kept giving us a hard time. And I said to him, "Excuse me, maestro, help me out here. Like I'm watching you like a hawk. I'm not even looking at the music.
Right.
When your baton goes down, I play." He's like, "Well, that's why you're late."
Yeah.
And I was like,
instead of the note getting to him by the time the baton.
I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And he had to explain physics and sound waves. He's like, "You're the back of the orchestra, yet your bass frequencies move slower. So if you wait to articulate that note for when you see my baton hit the downbeat, by the time I hear it, it's late. So you need to find that fraction of a moment before I strike the downbeat to attack and articulate so that it projects and arrives on time."
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, sure. So that we didn't, then he said, "Okay, let's take it again." And so I just, I said, "Everybody, just go with me."
Right.
So, because I'm the section leader, watch me and just time it with me. And so I did that. I watched his baton come down, and I played right before he hit the downbeat. And then he looked up and he stopped the orchestra. He goes, "Basses, you're on time finally." And I was like, "Oh my God." And so I started my jazz knowledge at first kind of messed me up in the sense of timekeeping and wanting to be like really good about time, and realizing in the classical setting in an orchestra, it doesn't work quite the same way. I need to be more elastic and more malleable to the moment in order to sound on time. And it felt really weird.
Yeah.
But I made peace with that. And then I found...
But then even bringing that back into your jazz playing, as you mature as a jazz player, then you realize that, well, you can be elastic, but the internal pulse is still like...
Sure.
It's got the Milt Hinton thing. But you can...
Yeah, there's a back and forth.
Yeah.
They can hand off to each other in ways that it's hard to explain necessarily, but once you're in the middle of it, it starts to make sense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I would also notice, like, a lot of classical players, when they're reading their part, when you're playing through a Dvorak symphony or something, you look at your note, and a lot of the players might not, the viola player might not realize, the viola section might not realize that the note that they're playing is like an internal harmony supporting the melody that the violin is playing. And so kind of understanding your place in the harmonic structure. So even though we might all have like mezzo forte marked, my mezzo forte has to be a little different than their mezzo forte because I shouldn't be louder than the melody. I should be supporting and things like that. So I found my jazz playing helped inform my musical understanding in the symphony setting, where I found listening to harmonic information and dynamic information and timing information was a different thing. And so I would kind of let these two worlds sort of kind of blend in my brain, so I felt like I could do the best job in that moment.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like it's sort of a vague answer, but
no,
it's kind of...
I mean, I feel like any other thing you do, whether it's like really getting into another genre on either the electric or upright, like you're on the same axe, but you get into another genre. So like that's going to inform the other one.
Absolutely.
And then the electric thing informs the upright and vice versa. When I started writing, that completely affected how I played. Yeah. So writing, the couple of times I dipped my toe in the production world, that changed it all. Yeah. And it's just you learn these different skills. And I guess it's back to the bandwidth thing. And your ears are now, you're outside of your head, and you're thinking about the whole of it all.
Yeah, but that's also obviously you're saying that's an experience thing, and I think it's also a maturity thing, because some things I've talked about with some students that are starting out, and I'll talk about being aware of these other things happening on stage while they're playing their thing, and to them I can see they just feel overloaded. Yeah, they're like, how can I possibly pay attention to what the drummer's doing with his ride cymbal and his kick drum and his hi-hat while I'm trying to play my time, think about how to improvise a walking bass line. And
I'm thinking about the notes in the chord. And
I'm trying to figure out what do I do when I see a minor major 7 chord. And you're telling me I got to pay attention to the drummer and that I should be listening to what the soloist is doing? Like, how can I do? And I remember when I was younger, feeling the same way. Like, how can I possibly listen to that?
Yeah.
I have to only listen to me right now, or else I'm just going to fall apart. And so there's an experience thing there.
What is your response to this question? How do you, what have you learned? How do you, let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
How do you think about how you listen? Like, do you consciously have a perspective on it? Like, if I just remove myself from being behind the bass,
right,
then I can hear it all in real time. You know,
yeah.
I don't hear every little nuance unless I want to
sure.
check in with the drummer to see like where he's putting his eighth note on the ride, or like if it's a pop thing, listen to how far back the kick is. Yeah,
well, I mean, there's those elements, absolutely. Because as a bass player, one of the first things I try to do right away is make sure I lock with whatever the drummer is doing.
Oh yeah.
And I've made good friends with a lot of drummers because of that.
Yeah.
Because they know after playing with me for a couple minutes that I'm gonna listen to them.
Sure.
And they know that
I think it's funny once they realize that's what you're doing, like, and just in a playing, when they shift it, just to double check, and it's like, okay, and then they put it back.
Yeah.
They're like, dude, I heard it.
Yeah.
I'm going with you through both of those.
They're like, okay, we'll be friends.
Yeah,
it's like, cool. Okay. But I mean, I'm not sure I know a really good answer to that, other than what I do at this point for me is that I am always trying to listen to everything else that's happening. Yeah. I really do try to split my listening into many fractured parts at the same time. I think some of it depends on the difficulty level of what I'm having to play. Sure. So for instance, if somebody calls a tune, I know a straight ahead tune, and I'm just playing a walking bass line, I'm going to, I got Milt in my ear telling me play time. I'm going to play straight quarter notes. I'm not going to get too fancy. I'm going to try to stay in a particular range that clears up the sound spectrum for all the other instruments. Like, if there's a guitar and a piano, I'm going to try to walk in my lowest range so that they have room to find their space. And in that situation, I don't have to think quite as intensively, I should say, about what I'm doing, so I can listen to what they're doing a little more, and I can catch more of what they're throwing around the bandstand. Yeah. Whereas if I'm like reading a tune that's got some really intricate rhythms, and I'm in that place, I'm trying to keep my ears open at all times, because I clearly have to make sure I'm locking up and I'm not messing up. But I am a little more focused on my thing in that moment, because now there's something more challenging in front of me.
Right. And you're responsible for this, and your ear might think, maybe there's something that's written specifically, in, I wouldn't say conflict, but, it's like it's perfectly, there's a rub somewhere on purpose.
Sure, exactly.
Because that's what they want. And
yeah.
You just got to stick to the ink and kind of plow right ahead.
Yeah, and so, those are challenging moments. But, I think kind of how that question addresses to, like, what I say to students, you say, like, how can I listen to all this? I'm trying to figure my thing out. Yeah. It's like, well, it's just, it might be hard right now, but you have to keep that as a goal and keep working towards it, and it will get easier. If you don't ever think about doing it, you're not going to get better at it.
Right.
So I try to make it be something they're aware of, and I'll say, like, this might feel too difficult at the moment or very challenging at the moment, but you need to be aware of it, because eventually it won't be, and it will improve your playing, and it will help you. So you need to be aware of it. You need to work towards that. And as you get better at your thing, you will be able to free up some more headroom, if you will, to add those other elements in. In other words, you will never be able to stop listening and paying attention while you're playing. Right. But you'll be able to kind of shift your focus around a little bit.
Right. I completely agree with you.
And so I just say, it might be really hard right now, but you just got to keep working towards it.
Yeah. Keep putting yourself in situations.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of it.
I mean, practice that.
Sure.
By doing it. Gary, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah.
All right. Alrighty, that was Mr. Gary Wicks. I loved his ideas about listening to music with peers, and bringing his peers in school into the lesson with him, so that his teacher could get a real gauge on what was happening and how he communicated with others and all the other things that go into playing jazz instead of just going through a piece of music. That's a really great idea. As far as listening to music with peers, I still try to do that as much as possible and get someone else's perspective. I think that's really important. as well. So thank you, Gary, for coming in and sharing that. After the interview, we hung out and we played duo for a little bit. It was a lot of fun. I kind of hacked my way through a classical thing he put in front of me, and then we just played some tunes. It was a lot of fun. What else is going on? For all the listeners out there interested in signing up for the Bass Shed newsletter, you can now text the word SHED, SHED, to 66866 to easily sign up for the newsletter and receive free transcriptions and the happenings related to the Bass Shed. Once again, that is SHED to the number 66866. Please take a second to do that and stay connected. And that's all I got for today, folks. I think I'm going to go take a nap. Be good, and I'll see you soon.